Do you remember when the Hillary Clinton campaign put out a bogus Russia collusion hoax, planted it in the deep state, and which is to say with the police agencies of government, who promptly leaked it to the media? And then, of course, what does Hillary Clinton do? She holds up those media reports and goes, see, there's an FBI investigation into Trump's ties with Putin. Again, feeding the idea that he's a Russian agent. So what makes that whole operation so deceptive is that she planted the story and then pretended like there was an independent investigation having nothing to do with her, and she was merely referring to it. This all came to my mind because emails obtained by the GOP leadership in the House show that Anthony Fauci, Dr. Fauci, did exactly the same thing. Now, in April 17, 2020, here's Fauci talking. There was a study recently, he says, where a group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences in bats as they evolve and the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is totally consistent with the jump of a species from an animal to a human. Then he goes on to say, so the paper will be available. I don't have the authors right now, but we can make it available to you. He's talking about the fact that there's a paper that disputes the lab leak theory of the origins of COVID and suggests a animal to human or a natural origin. But notice Fauci's language. He basically goes, there's a paper out there. I don't really know who wrote it. But you know what? I can get it and give it to you guys. Turns out that this paper, Fauci knows exactly who wrote it. Why? Because he put him up to it. He knows exactly about the paper. Why? Because he's the one who not only suggested the paper, but when the paper was drafted, he reviewed a draft of that paper before it was published. And after changes were made to the paper, he reviewed the final draft. So this is a Fauci-generated, or at least partly Fauci-generated paper. Apparently, there was another guy involved, a guy who subsequently became the head of the World Health Organization science department, so chief scientist for the World Health Organization. Fauci and this other guy cooked up this paper. Now, why did they cook it up? They cooked it up because they were facing criticism that they were not looking properly at the origins of COVID. And so what Fauci wants to do is shut down the idea that COVID might have had a lab leak, might have originated from the Wuhan lab. And the House happily now has chapter and verse on this. In fact, this paper we're talking about was written 4 days after Fauci, the NIH boss, Francis Collins. They have a phone call with these top virologists to talk about this lab leak theory. And some of these guys think that there may have been a lab leak. But you can see what happens is that Fauci not only doesn't want that to be stressed, so he kind of prods these guys to go into a different direction to emphasize the natural origin. And guess what? The moment that they do this in this paper, there's money from the federal government now flowing in their direction. In other words, I wouldn't necessarily call it a bribe, because typically a bribe is given beforehand. Here's the money. Now you do this. But let's call it a reward. You do what I say, and guess what? We have ways to thank you for the work you're doing in supporting our position. So all of this now raises the interesting question, why would Fauci do this? Why is it so important for Fauci for COVID not to have come out of a lab? And the answer, I think, is pretty obvious. It's because Fauci has been supporting, through the U.S. government, gain-of-function research in America. And when, of course, there were restrictions placed on gain-of-function research in America, essentially farming out that research to China and perhaps to other places like Ukraine and elsewhere. So Fauci knows they've been doing this. He doesn't want to be held responsible for helping to subsidize a global pandemic that's killed, several million people. And so Fauci goes, listen, let's head this off at the pass. Let's create he's not that he's creating bogus academic research, but he's steering the academic research. And what's more important, he's not divulging his role in doing saying it. It's one thing if he said, hey, listen, I'm a strong believer in the natural origins theory. I told these 4 virologists to write about it. No, he acts like, well, this paper just came out. Very interesting. I don't really know all the details. I don't know all the people who wrote it, but they're some of the world's most respected virologists. So you can see what a little snake this Fauci character is. Debbie's like, isn't this illegal? Isn't what he's doing illegal? I don't know if it's illegal, but it's certainly sneaky. It's certainly deceptive. It's certainly immoral.